All right. Hello, everybody. Boo. We're right before Michael Phelps, and I know as much as we're interesting, I think it might be better to see a gold medalist swimmer. So we're going to try to get everybody out of here probably 10 to 15 minutes before 5, just to make sure can all attend. We're fine with sticking around a little bit longer, but I just wanted to be mindful of that. My name's Chris Gormley. I'm the leader of the Conductiv team. Conductiv is part of Premier. We're wholly owned by Premier. We focus on purchase services. So specifically, we're going to be talking today about contracted purchase services and how you measure supplier performance. The thing we'll talk about today can also be used with goods, but because services are intrinsically quality driven, we wanted to talk about this and show you the tools that we've built and that the process by which we build them. So this is going to be a little bit of sausage making, if you will, on how software is actually created. So some of you are probably used to that, but sometimes you might think, well, how do you create software? And we're here to show you how we helped solve the problem and are solving the problem of supplier performance management. So I want to introduce my panelists. We're going to start with Nancy Daniels, and then we're going to then go to Irma Spahic, who's over here. She's out of order. And then Jonathan Pruitt. And I want to have them introduce themselves one at a time.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I lead product and user experience at Conductiv, and I've been with the company about 3.5 years.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Irma Spahic, and I'm a Senior Director of Solutions and Strategy on the Conductiv team. And I really work closely with our customers, our members, and I focus on just evaluating their purchase service program and determining how they can further enhance and further develop their program. Prior to that, I've been with the Conductiv team for about a year now, but prior to that I worked for a larger health system in Colorado, UC Health. I was there for about 8 years, and for the last 3 years of my tenure there, I managed the purchase service department. So very familiar with purchase services. I guess you could say it's a little bit in my blood, and I'm just looking forward to this discussion.
Hi there, I'm Jonathan Pruitt. I'm a software product manager at Conductiv, product managing the software that we're going to demo today, and I work on Nancy's team.
Thank you to our panelists. So we're going to cover 3 things today. The first thing is we're going to talk about why we are here, why we created the solution you'll see. And then we're going to hear about how we went from the idea and the problem that I'll describe to how we designed the software. And then Jonathan's going to show you the software that is available in a beta form at this point. So that's the 3 things we'll cover today. So let me go to the first slide, just to illustrate. We originally created this solution for several reasons, but in our strategic sourcing advisory board at Premier, and even before we were acquired by Premier, what we discovered is that a lot of the organizations we dealt with weren't measuring the experience outside of the contract. So you established a contract, you got your price, you got your terms, then what? Contract goes off. Is the supplier actually performing against what they put in the contract? Are your stakeholders happy with what they're getting? And in a services environment, that's pretty important. So there are hard factors that can be measured, and there's some soft factors that can be measured. But a lot of people don't measure them. And that's not just in healthcare. We started talking about this to non-healthcare entities, and there's a large multinational device manufacturer who I was surprised to see doesn't do this today with any of their suppliers. So they were very interested in this. So you could see several of the issues that we run into. I mean, obviously, it's great to have a good metrics-driven supplier relationship because you get what you want and the supplier is actually on an even playing field with data. Lack of transparency, accountability, and one thing that we'll touch on is in healthcare, there are several regulatory requirements that are increasingly being applied by JCO to ensure that services that affect patient care are actually tracked and measured. And that's a little bit of what this problem set helps solve as well. So those are some of the issues and problems that we've run into. And by the way, don't be shy. If you have a question, please let us know. So I want to start at the bottom and then go to the top. The solution that we're creating is in stair steps, and you can see that we iterate off our products as we go forward. The first step is just tracking supplier performance, just like you were doing a QBR, but doing so in a more automated way. establishing key performance indicators for certain categories and suppliers so you can, in fact, track those KPIs and disseminate those across your organization. The next layer is to get the stakeholder feedback directly from them. And we started with the suppliers because you have a little bit more power over them. The stakeholders, on the other hand, might be less reluctant to provide feedback, but you need their feedback because they're the ones who are using this. And then when you start combining those two, you can then start applying the regulatory piece, which is at the very top, which is the last use case we have and probably the most important when you think about its direct applicability. But we wanted to start with the basic problem of just measuring supplier performance in its most basic form and then moving beyond that. So that's what we created this for, and this is what we're working on. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we interact with our customers. We had a mastermind group which included both Conductiv, Premier, Vizient, HPG, didn't matter. Well, this is one of their main topics, and I'd like to hear perhaps in the Q&A how important this is for you in the audience. In other words, is this a nice to have, a must have? Is it something that is really important as it pertains to not only services but non-services, and some of the methods that you might use to do this today? But I want Irma to perhaps take you down her path at UC Health, because she had to manage this and had to create the kind of tools that are leading partly to what we're creating here, because her feedback represents a lot of the same feedback that we're hearing in the marketplace.
Thank you, Chris. And like Chris mentioned, today I'll be just sharing with you a little bit about my experience with having managed supplier performance. And I'll just give you a little bit insight into the contract evaluation process that we
Hey, Irma,
developed.
is your mic live? I guess
I
it
believe
is.
so.
Yep. There
Can
you
you
go.
all hear me well? Okay. And by all means, our process was in no shape or form perfect. And there's definitely areas that I would have liked to further develop upon and improve upon. But our process was sufficient in the sense that it allowed us to really start tracking supplier performance and hold some of our suppliers accountable for a certain level of performance. And as a sourcing director in my old role at UC Health, I would say one of my main responsibilities, as well as my team's responsibility, was to ensure that we were executing financially competitive service agreements. But at the same time, we were also responsible for ensuring that the suppliers we did business with, the suppliers that we contracted with, were also providing quality of service. And I think we were in a unique situation at our organization because our leadership really focused in on quality of service. They prioritized quality of service. And I think it was because they recognized that the type of service a third party provides within your facility directly impacts your continuum of care and the patient experience overall. So it was really good to have just executive leadership support to prioritize supplier performance management. And like Chris alluded to earlier, there are several regulatory bodies out there, one being Joint Commission, that specifically holds hospital leadership accountable for making sure that contracted services are provided in a safe and effective manner. So there is also the regulatory component that matters here. But I would say tracking supplier performance is easier said than done. It is definitely a journey, and as we embarked upon our journey, there were a couple of things that I would say, a couple of challenges that we immediately ran into. One of the things that I discovered early on in the process was the fact that I had about 2,200 different service agreements, and many of our contracts didn't really have clear service expectations embedded in them. Many of our contracts didn't have KPIs, and some of our contracts were extremely vague. So we had to really prioritize efforts, and we focused in on our patient care contracts, and I specifically devoted a resource. I remember hiring a couple of temps one summer to just simply amend all of my patient care contracts to include key performance indicators. So that was kind of step one, amend some of our key agreements to include KPI. And then all of our other non-patient care agreements were also addressed, but we addressed them as they came up for renewal. So every time a contract expired or we needed to renew it or we took a service out to bid, we made sure to include KPIs in those agreements as well. But once we had defined what service expectations we had, we still had to figure out what contract evaluation, supplier performance, management process was going to work for us. So one of the things that we really valued were business reviews. And ideally, in an ideal situation, we would have liked to have done as many business reviews with our suppliers as possible. But that wasn't possible because we were dealing with too many suppliers, too many agreements, and we didn't have the bandwidth. And we also knew that it wasn't really supply chain that was best equipped to evaluate supplier performance in many instances. It was actually the department heads, the business owners, the leaders that were interacting with these vendors on a regular basis that were more equipped to address and evaluate supplier performance. So we knew that we had to get our business owners involved. And we still did business reviews. I don't want you to think that we didn't do business reviews, but we really did business reviews for some of our key strategic vendor partners. We couldn't do it with all of them. So we then developed a contract evaluation survey that was administered at the department level. And if you were a department that was utilizing the service and or paying for the service in any shape or form, you would have to complete a contract evaluation survey on an annual basis. Your department leadership would have to complete that survey. And like I said, it was administered at the department level. If a department evaluated a supplier unfavorably, supply chain was made aware of that, and then we were pulled in to work very closely with the department business owner and the supplier to go through a corrective action process and ultimately, remedy the lack of performance. And the individual department evaluations ultimately all rolled up at the facility level. So for each supplier, we were able to tell whether or not a facility on a standalone basis was fairly satisfied with that supplier. But because we were administering contract evaluations at the department level, we could also fairly easily see if there were certain areas of the hospital that needed service improvements versus other areas that may be very satisfied with a given supplier's performance. We also involved our executive leadership. They were very closely involved. They helped ensure that these contract evaluations were completed in a timely manner. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I think the process worked. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed us to just accomplish a few key aspects, one being promoting quality of service, and then the other being holding our suppliers accountable. I do think that there are a couple of areas that I personally wish we could have just done a better job in. One was that our contract evaluation survey was fairly generic. We posed the same 10 questions to all suppliers across all service categories. And in an ideal situation, I would have liked to have linked the survey questions to some of the KPIs that existed in those vendor agreements. And at that time, we just didn't have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to do that to that level. And then the other element I think that we could have improved upon was just better assisting our business owners with the collection of data. Many of our business owners struggled to collect data to be able to evaluate supplier performance. There were a few business owners that were actually themselves tracking supplier performance, but many really relied on the supplier to share data with them, and some just didn't track supplier performance or supplier performance metrics whatsoever. And I think anytime you're evaluating a vendor, being able to just point to data to quantify and explain why you evaluated a certain supplier the way you did is super helpful. And it also allows you to have more productive conversations with your suppliers. So that was kind of my experience with supplier performance management. Hopefully that gives you a little bit insight into what I encountered. But I think, whenever we can use technology to just make this process a bit more efficient, a lot of healthcare organizations, one being UC Health, could significantly benefit from that. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Chris.
Yep, it's over to Nancy. And Nancy, do you want to come up here, or, well, here's the clicker, by the way. Yeah, you can do it
Sure,
from
I
there.
can, maybe because I heard a noise there.
Yeah, and so as we transition here, does this make sense? Does this fit other people's experience? Do you find that you have the same kind of executive support that Irma highlighted? 'Cause that gets back to the sense of urgency of, okay. Now, what Nancy's going to do now is take us through, so we have a problem, Irma described the problem. We have other people highlighting similar problems. Okay, now what do you do with it? And we're going to go through the ideation to first, if you want to call it prototype, and then Jonathan's going to take you through our current beta version of our software, which is, I think, much better than beta, and we do have it actively being used by our customers right now, but I just want to give you a sense of what status that's in right now. Thank you.
So we at Conductiv have a product-led focus, and I just want to start with, like, what do we consider product? So you think of our product as our software platform. Product is, a business. Our GPO is our product, is a business. We also have programs that we consider businesses, consider products. For example, I don't know if any of you have seen our Lumen initiative, and Lumen is for supplier diversity. And we have information, we have education, we have newsletter. That's a type of product. But I think that when we talk about the focus and the way that we approach product development and creating solutions, it's also a relationship, and it's really important. We focus on user-focused product design. So I want to spend a moment talking about that. It's not coming up with a solution based on, first of all, few of our customers are as eloquent or as thorough as Irma, but you don't want to design for one person. We want to design for the majority or composite of customers' needs to meet their needs and find out their pain points, as we call it. And not to, we have amazing engineers, and it's not to build something because we have engineers who know how to build something or can build it. It's very focused on who are the end users. We determine sometimes our end users aren't the ones we expect. There are stakeholders who aren't necessarily supply chain, et cetera, that we're finding out about. And we're also not designing for us, for designers. Like, this is beautiful, this is pretty, this is fun, this will win awards. No, it's really, especially SaaS software, business software, it really needs to make things better, faster, clearer. So that's the approach that we use and throughout the organization, and that also means working very closely with other teams in the organization. I mean, we are not the product silo, product and engineering. We work super closely with marketing, with customer success, with the people who are working on a daily basis with customers. This particular slide, one usually sees it more like a circle because it's a cycle, but anyways, did it as a list. But we start with research, and some of the research is knowing what our customers want, having interviews with them, what's out in the marketplace right now, what's the competitive space look like. Then once we determine that, we get into several layers of design, and I'm going to illustrate those things, what we do in design, and we test that design. And I don't mean just testing that it passes QA and engineering, but go back to our customers and our users and sort of say, does this feel right? Are we getting to solving the problem that you want? Because often a lot of this for user-focused design is a customer might say, I want to be able to do something, do this. We as researchers and designers dig in and find out that's not actually the problem we're trying to solve. There's something deeper or there's something broader, and that's what we as UX, user experience designers, really pride ourselves on trying to figure that out and to come back with what that is. But it isn't in a silo. It isn't do it, release it, and it's done. We do collaborate and talk to customers a lot. We even have a tech collaborator program with a handful of customers who are really engaged with us, who like this learning how the sausage is made and how the design comes about, so that it's like, hey, we have something we want to show you, even if it's a questionnaire or a prototype or a design, we will go to them and get some feedback, and that's very helpful. Then we go to a release, and it can be, very early. In this case, we're showing you something that's in beta. We continue to iterate, and you can see that beyond that. But it's also very important that we learn from the feedback. It's not like, oh, they just don't get it. It's, that's not the right way to design for user focus. It's like we missed something, whether it's the UI, the interface wasn't clear, or we made assumptions. We thought, oh, this is the way this is the way to solve their problem, and maybe it takes a while to get there, or maybe there's multiple answers for it. So we are very open, and we do get a lot of feedback along the way. And then iterate. That's what I was talking about with the circle. You keep going, you figure out, like, you might have hit, every software that you all are familiar with, every app, they iterate. There are things that just didn't hit right on. It's not like it's a home run. Very, 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 very rare. You have to iterate on it and develop it until you get it exactly right in most cases, and that's the truth. So you iterate, you continue to expand on it, you go back to design and keep working through it. So here's just an example on research. So research can be a number of different things. It could be interviews, it could be surveys, so some qualitative, some quantitative. Here's an example just of something where we were talking to Supplier. We at Conductiv are spending a lot of our time on the design and product team learning about suppliers, because we want to make the supplier-member relationship much more transparent and equal in all of our products as we move forward. So just, taking transcripts, having interviews, and we know how to do the research, so we actually get feedback. You can determine patterns and things that are really useful, not just one-offs, because then you're really all over the place with design. The next step can be, and this is pretty much best practices, what exists, but what I'm showing you, it isn't like every product team uses this exactly, but really this is best practices on how software is designed. The journey map, like what is the journey? What has to happen, step 1, step 2, step 3, who's in it, who needs to respond to it, and this is just an example one. So for setting up KPIs, supplier performance for us, for our first version, we know the big part is setting it up. How do you set it up? You have to talk to the supplier, you have to look at contracts, all of these different things. We spent a lot of time. This is a very complicated product, I have to say. It's taken us a long time to even get to beta because there's so many different aspects to it. It's like a kind of, I call it layers of an onion. It's really complicated. But also it's the communication and the notification, like, yes, you have to report, and yes, this is your time frame, and you must do that. The supplier needs to report on that, and then the owner, business owner, needs to be able to track the progress, monitor, and assess the results so they understand how well this is doing. So this is just showing a typical journey map. Then we get into something called wireframes. And even though these are set up as a grid, more typically they are like one to the next, to the next, to the next. But this is not really design yet. This is the UI, the interface. We're trying to figure out, like, what are the decisions? What is this? Is it a chart? Is it a yes, no? Is it you have to fill in a field, a form field? Like, what do you have to do there? So this is kind of pre-design, or it's part of design, but wireframes are a very diagrammatic way of what happens screen to screen to screen to get to where you need to be. And at this point, we might take this back, and we would show this to some customers to get some feedback on it. Does this suit what you're trying to do? Along the process, here's an example of something that we haven't done yet, but we know is on the roadmap. Some of these reporting of KPIs can be a satisfaction thing. Like, are you happy with what's happened? Does your landscaping look good? Are your rooms clean? And it can just be like a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a happy face, smile face. Well, that shouldn't be on a laptop that you have to go and log in to do that. That would be something that would be a mobile solution. And I think that kind of qualitative feedback for satisfaction is something part of supplier performance that we discovered, we determined, and you have to sort of weigh, like, what do you do now? What do you do? What is the MVP, the first product that you come out with, and how do you grow it over time? Now we start getting into a bit more of what the the demo will show you what our finished product is. We've got a great design team, UX design team, who's awesome in visual design. And we have a design framework, which also is, very best practices for software design, where everything is consistent in components. It makes it very easy for the engineers to build it and to build it fast. But more importantly, for the user focus, you understand the pattern of what happens. Where do you go to do something? Where does something come up? So these are actually mock-ups. This is from we string the mock-ups together, the screens, into a prototype that's clickable prototype, so you can see how the whole flow is. But I'm saying the UI of how the side panel opens, how the drop-down happens, where the buttons are, where the results show. All of those sorts of things are part of the framework. We actually build ours on top of what's called Google Material UI, which is it's awesome because we don't have to design from scratch. You start on that foundation, you build your custom on top of that. My last slide, so we're getting to the screens, prototypes where things are clickable and you can actually simulate the experience and go back to customers again to say, how's this working? We're getting closer. What do you think? And the last one I think is very important is we're not just designing a tool to make it, to enable a user to do something. We're building the data and the intelligence for being able to make it smarter. And what I mean by that is this is an example of, you probably can't see the details too much, but you're adding a KPI and we're saying, here's what we suggest because we at Conductiv have been doing this for a while. Here's the ones that we see in the contract that you'd want to track for a particular supplier category. Great. So we can help you. But what if you have one already in a contract? Or what if a supplier has told you, this is what we're typically measured on, something different? So we allow for that in our software where you can customize it, but not only can you customize it, but we will learn from that. So the next time around, you will see, we're learning and we're going to be able to share, this might be the best practices for what you'd want to actually track for that particular category or that particular supplier. So it's really important that we do that we're making it smarter over time. And you can see we really value in this user experience real clarity. You see where you're at. You see I've got four steps in this and then I'm done. You don't where am I? How much more do I have to do here? It really gives a sense of what you're trying to do to get through it. So thank you for letting me go through a little bit on this background of how the design comes about in our process. And now Jonathan's going to show you what our beta product looks like.
Are there any questions so far? Does anybody have anything off?
Okay, so I'm a product manager here, and I'm going to do a live demo from our staging environment because I like to tempt fate, and I seeded some things in here that we can talk about this morning. One of the first things I want to show you is this is our supplier performance module on our platform. So one of the key concepts to the way that we organize information is by category, by spend category. So your purchase services will show up down here within the different categories that they're in. And of course, we've got filters, so if you have hundreds of different categories, you can jump right to the ones that you're interested in. But you're presented here with all your different categories, and what Nancy was saying, our designers put a lot of thought into the way that we roll up information here and what catches your attention. And so the way that it works is when you establish KPIs on any supplier within any category, there's a reporting period that happens. There's a cadence that takes place on a regular frequency. And we have put the burden on the supplier to actually do their own reporting. So once you set these things up, it kind of goes on autopilot, and it goes out, the system faithfully goes out every month, and it harvests these results of the KPI, right? So it puts the burden on the supplier to, I say burden, but it is very fast, right? It's can be done from any platform. It's a link from email. They do not need to log into the Conductiv platform. The last thing anyone needs is more login credentials, so it's very fast. You can just respond right away on your mobile device. But what we do with that then is we start to roll these things up. So underneath each category here, you can drill in, like for advertising and marketing, let's say, and see this category in more detail. And we roll up the compliance status across all the KPIs, across all the suppliers that you have in that category. And there's Boolean logic that takes place. So if a supplier is not in compliance, it'll roll that not in compliance all the way up to the top level. And what this allows is for category managers or executives who are very busy, right, and have thousands of contracts going on. It allows them to focus and draws their attention exactly to what the problem is currently. And so when you drill into a category here, you see that I've set up a couple KPIs this morning. One is for a Walnut Creek urgent care facility, and one is for an Oakland General Hospital. I just made these up. And in this case, they've got different, or they've got maybe the same supplier or different suppliers. It's highly configurable. But we're tracking two different KPIs at two different facilities here. And then down here, I can drill in, and if I want to see a history of a certain supplier, I can drill into the details page for that supplier. I can see the spend that we have with that supplier. And then farther down, I can see for the past few, actually as many reporting periods as has transpired. This one's only 2 months, but for as many reporting periods as have transpired, you can see what their compliance status was. So let me jump in real quick and show you how you actually set these KPIs up, because it's really simple. And we do a lot to help people get started, even in the software. So one of the things that we offer is we tapped our internal expertise to come up with pre-canned KPIs. So we have 58 KPIs that come in the platform across 22 different categories. Now that doesn't mean they're active right away. You have to actually go in and activate them if that's something that you want to track. But it's easy to do, and it provides a nice place to get started. So that's this checkbox here, this suggest categories. And so once I do that and hit this, it'll filter this table, this categories table, only to the categories where Conductiv is making recommendations on KPIs that you could set up for that. And so if I come in here and let's say I do blood products. So we have no KPIs set up here, but we see all our suppliers listed. And so, of course, there's a big call to action here. And this is the stepper that Nancy was showing. You'll note this developed product looks exactly like the high-fidelity wireframe that our designers did because of the frameworks that the design team has put in place. But in this particular one, there's really no limit to the permutations that you can come up with on what you want to track and how often. So the first step is just either create your own KPI, pull it out of a contract perhaps, or choose one of our pre-canned KPIs. So let's say orders completed is one that we're interested in. The next step then is to select the suppliers. And so if I expand this combo box, I'm presented with all my suppliers on the Conductiv platform, and this is pulled from a vendor master or an AP file or something like that. And you can apply it to all of them, or you can apply it to select ones. And then moving on to the next step is what you want to call it. So this is where if you wanted to target a specific facility that you had, you could append this or prepend it with the name of the facility that you were interested in tracking it at. And then you can also modify to any degree that you want what this value is for the KPI itself. So these are just text input boxes, and like I said, this is basically, when it gets sent to the supplier, it's basically just a Boolean yes or no, and we'll take a look at that, how that actually comes across in a second. And then finally, the last step to set up a KPI is to determine when it starts and determine the frequency for it. So the frequencies that we support are monthly, quarterly, and annually. So you can see that there. And then if you choose you choose the starting month, and so we go out a full year. So you can start, if you just did a review or something, you can start it a year from now if you want to. And after that, the system will faithfully send off those KPIs for review every month. And let me show you real quick what it looks like from the supplier's perspective. And so this is, I pulled this up from my email earlier. I seeded this data this morning. So this is an example of what they would see. So in this case, this is the advertising services, I believe. And so this is a budget adherence question, right? So this could also be, if it's clinically driven, maybe we have to go to a system of record and pull a file as evidence. But they can upload files from anywhere right there, and they can choose yes, no, or NA. So if they choose an NA, that would roll up to the triangle with the exclamation point to the top level. And if they choose NA, then we require that they enter a comment in there as well. So, maybe for interpretation or something like that, if there's a KPI and an interpreter didn't show up, and technically maybe they have to answer this question no, they could also click NA and say, well, our interpreter did try to show up, but no one was there. So there's a transparency there that this helps to facilitate, and a record. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint real quick here. And go from this slide. There it is. So it's actually a very powerful foundation, I think. It's category driven. It's based off your spend with your suppliers. There's almost an infinite customization right out of the box, but we also support a lot of good places to get started through those pre-canned KPIs in the 22 categories. We've got a good roadmap for this, and if you're interested in actually digging into this some more, I would encourage you to reach out to us. One of the things that I would like to see is I would like to hear what your challenge is, and then see if we can put together a demo of how this could help you with your supplier performance management.
Question, how do you get access to this tool? Because, for example, if you're already a member of Conductiv, is this readily available, or is this an additional thing that you're going to have to pay for, or is this already part of being a member of Conductiv?
So if you're saying a member of Conductiv's GPO, this is something that's additional. So Conductiv consists of two major elements. Conductiv is a overall element for Conductiv contracts, which is our GPO, and then we have Conductiv Inc., which includes our software and our services group, okay? Because of the safe harbor regulations, we have two different entities. So on the GPO side, they work together. This piece is a module that costs something extra, and right now it's in beta mode. So we're working with customers to put that in place. This is the time for questions. So,
Yeah, perfect.
thank you for leading. Yes, ma'am.
So we do KPIs right now, but it's a very manual process, and our end users will come to us and request contracts so that they can review them. Does this tool allow for a connection to those contracts so it's all in one place, or is that piece still a bit of a manual process?
Well, it's a good thing we have a product manager here.
Yeah, so actually from the very first time that I demoed this to a customer, that question came up. So we have on our roadmap for starting in July, which is in a few days, a data center component where we'll make use of some premier technology as well, hopefully, to go in and connect to other systems to pull that in. So we know that that's something that needs to be in here. Fundamentally, I think it's not much different if in the way that the system supports it now, if a person manually goes and pulls that in and uploads it versus the system goes and retrieves it and effectively does the survey that you saw, does that systematically. The way that the information rolls up will still be the same, and the way that you would go in and find that information in case of an audit would also be the same. But data connection is on the first part of our roadmap, first quarter.
And if I can expand on that, the one thing, I mean, we're showing you one isolated module that solves a specific set of problems. The broader play is the platform itself makes, I'll call it multiple use. It's the 1 + 1 = 3 concept. So if I've got a contract and it's in the system or it's pointing at the system, we have a supplier, and we're not showing it here today, but we can certainly show it at any point. It's a supplier portal where suppliers go in and they can maintain their own profiles. So if you're a GPO member, that's great. If you're not, you could put a profile in and say, here are my specifics that would be useful to a buyer. And the buyer, you can go into the platform and look at those suppliers as you're considering a RFP or an RFI, or you want to research a category. But what's most important many times is, are you cross-tabulating the contract with the supplier record? And when you're in the supplier record, can you see the contract? Therefore, you're not having to go hunt and peck for that. And when you see a KPI like this, it's attached to that supplier record. And ultimately, what we're trying to build is sort of Yelp or TripAdvisor or whatever you want to call it for industrial B2B service providers. I mean, why shouldn't that exist, right? So you have an idea that this supplier is not only a good cost decision, but I have got hard quality data that I could also base my decision on that may be from my peers or peer group. So the idea is we're trying to create these cross pointers that refer to contracts, that refer to supplier records, that refer to RFPs, that refer to all of those, and they all point at one another. And that's largely the case on our platform today. This is the newest thing we're releasing. Is this the hook? Get upstate.
No, we want
No.
to finish a little early so we
Yeah.
can miss Michael Phelps.
Oh, Michael Phelps, what has he got on me?
No offense.
No, so it is 4:42. We want to give you the time to get over there. If there are other questions, please ask them and/or come up here. But I want to give you all the chance to get over there and get a good seat. So thank you.